Sister grabbed the microphone at her own engagement party, pointed at me in front of 80 people, and announced that I would be signing over my condo to her as an engagement gift. When I said no, her fiancé threw a glass of red wine directly into my face. What neither of them knew was that the woman sitting 3 feet away from me was a federal judge who had just finished a landmark housing fraud case. This is where the night stopped being a party and started being something else entirely. I need to back up because none of this makes sense without the context. I am a forensic accountant. I know that sounds dry. People hear that and they picture someone in a gray cardigan surrounded by spreadsheets, and honestly, some days that is accurate. But what it really means is that I am trained to find the thing that is hidden. I follow money the way other people follow gossip. I notice patterns. I notice when numbers do not add up. I notice when someone's lifestyle does not match their income. It is not a skill I switch off when I go home for the holidays. My sister is 4 years younger than me. Growing up, she was the one our parents worried about in the way parents secretly enjoy worrying. The dramatic one, the one with the big dreams and the bigger feelings, the one whose school plays everyone attended, even if it meant rearranging their entire week. I was the one who handled things quietly. Paid my own tuition with a combination of scholarships and weekend bartending shifts. Got my CPA at 24. Bought my condo at 27 with a down payment I had been saving since I was 22. It was a 2-bedroom unit on the 6th floor of a building in the Arts District, 12 minutes from my office. I chose it because of the light in the mornings and because it had a second bedroom I used as a home office. To me, it was the most concrete proof I had ever had that the grinding, unglamorous years of doing everything right had actually meant something. My sister had moved through a series of situations she described as careers, lifestyle blogger, pop-up vintage boutique owner, content creator, wellness coach. None of them had quite crystallized. She was genuinely talented in ways I admired, actually. She had a gift for aesthetics and for making things look effortless and beautiful, but beautiful things cost money, and she had a reliable habit of spending money she did not have on the vision she was certain was about to pay off any day now. I had helped her. Repeatedly. $1,000 here when the boutique had a slow month. $2,000 there when her car needed repairs she could not cover. Once, memorably, I wired her rent for 3 months when a collaboration deal fell through right before a lease renewal. I did these things because she was my sister, and I loved her, and because I told myself it was temporary, that she was almost there, that the next thing would be the thing. Then she met him. His name was Fletcher, and he arrived in her life approximately 8 months before the engagement party with the energy of someone who had just discovered he was the protagonist of a very important story. He was 41, which was 15 years older than my sister, and he described himself as a real estate developer, a term that in my experience covers an enormous range of things, from legitimate builder of actual buildings to man who has attended 2 seminars and printed business cards. He wore expensive watches and had the kind of confidence that does not pause to consider whether it is warranted. My sister was dazzled, my parents were charmed. I pulled up his name on 3 different databases within 48 hours of meeting him and found almost nothing, which is sometimes worse than finding something bad. He proposed after 5 months. My sister called me, and her happiness was so pure and so bright that I genuinely pushed my reservations aside. I said congratulations, and I meant it. I offered to help plan the engagement party. I spent 3 weekends helping her coordinate the venue, the catering, the lighting. I made a spreadsheet. I was the spreadsheet sister, and I was at peace with that. The party was held at a rooftop venue downtown. It was a Friday evening in September, and the weather had decided to cooperate, warm and clear. The city laid out below us in a grid of gold light. 80 guests. Open bar. My sister looked radiant in a sage green dress she had been describing to me in installments for 6 weeks. I was genuinely happy for her, standing near the bar with a glass of Prosecco, talking to my colleague Rhonda, who happened to be one of my closest friends, and who happened to have recently been confirmed to the federal bench after a decade as a prosecutor. Rhonda and I had been friends since law school, where I had been pursuing a dual degree, and she had been the sharpest person in every room she entered. She was now 52, with close-cropped natural hair and the particular stillness of someone who has spent 30 years listening to people in high-pressure situations and learning exactly when to speak and when to let silence do the work. She was sitting in the chair next to mine, quietly finishing a plate of bruschetta, when the microphone feedback whined through the speakers. My sister had taken the mic from the DJ. I assumed this was a toast moment. I set my glass down and smiled at her. She beamed back. Then she turned to the crowd. "Okay, everyone, I need a moment because I have the most exciting announcement." She reached out and took Fletcher's hand. He stepped up beside her with the satisfaction of a man who had already seen the script. "So, you all know that Fletcher and I have been dreaming about where we're going to start our life together, and we have found the absolute perfect place." She paused. She was good at pauses. My incredible, brilliant, successful big sister has a gorgeous condo in the Arts District. A ripple of smiles went through the crowd. People glanced at me. "And we have decided that as our engagement gift, she is going to sign it over to us. We're going to gut renovate the second bedroom into a proper master closet, put in new floors, list it within 18 months at a significant profit, and use that to fund Fletcher's next development project." She raised her champagne flute. "So here's to family and to new beginnings, and to the most generous sister in the world." The room waited for me to raise my glass. I did not raise my glass. I think I held completely still for 3 full seconds, which is a long time to be completely still when 80 people are looking at you. I was doing what I always do when presented with something that does not compute. I was running the numbers in my head. The condo was worth $420,000. I still owed $90 on the mortgage, but the equity was mine. It was not a gift. It was not something she had been promised. It was the central structure of my financial life. I stood up. I kept my voice low and even, the way I do when I am presenting findings to a client who is not going to enjoy the findings. "I'm so happy for you both," I said clearly enough for the nearest tables to hear. "But I have to be honest, we have never discussed this. The condo is not a gift that's on the table. It was never on the table. I'm sorry." The room went very quiet. My sister's smile did not disappear so much as rearrange itself into something harder. Fletcher let go of her hand. He turned toward me fully, and then, without any of the calculation my sister had displayed, without the performance or the preamble, he picked up his champagne flute, stepped forward 2 paces, and threw the entire contents directly into my face. The wine was red. It was cold. It went into my eyes and my hair and down the front of my cream-colored blouse in a slow, decisive tide. The sound that followed was not a gasp so much as a held breath. The entire party inhaling at once and not exhaling. I stood there, wine dripping off my chin, and I was very calm in the way that sometimes happens when something is so far outside the normal range of experience that your nervous system simply cannot classify it as real yet. "You selfish witch," Fletcher said. His voice was very controlled, which was almost worse than if he had been shouting. "Your sister has given you everything, and you can't give her one thing." One thing. Fletcher. It was Rhonda. She had not raised her voice. She had simply said his name, and something in the register of it, flat, certain, the tone of someone stating a fact rather than asking a question, cut through the room. She set her plate down on the table beside her and stood up. She was not a tall woman, but she had a quality of taking up exactly as much space as the moment required. "What you just did," she said, looking at Fletcher with an expression I had seen her use in depositions, "constitutes assault. Intentional harmful contact. In this state, with this many witnesses, that is a misdemeanor at minimum and potentially a felony depending on how the DA feels about it." She let that land. "My name is Judge Rhonda Castillo. I've been a federal judge for 14 months, and before that I spent a decade as a prosecutor and I have excellent recall." She looked at my sister, then back at Fletcher. "I would strongly suggest you think about your next sentence very carefully." Fletcher opened his mouth, then he closed it. My sister made a sound I had never heard her make before, small and airless, like something deflating. Rhonda came to me and handed me a linen napkin from the table. She examined my face the way she examines everything, quickly and completely. "Are you hurt? Did any get in your eyes?" "Some. I'm okay." "You're not okay," she said, not unkindly. "But you will be. Come with me." She walked me to the restroom, and behind us I could hear the low, urgent murmur of a party trying to figure out what to do with itself. Fletcher was saying something to my sister. My sister's voice was rising in pitch. In the restroom, under the fluorescent lights, with cold water and paper towels, I started to think clearly again. My eye was stinging. The front of my blouse was ruined. My face in the mirror looked pink and startled. But the thing that was sharpest in my mind was not the whine or the humiliation or even the shock. It was a single question I had been sitting on for 6 months without letting myself ask it directly. Who is Fletcher? Because I had looked. I had done a surface search 8 months ago and found almost nothing, and I had told myself that meant he was fine. But a forensic accountant knows that finding nothing is not the same as finding clean. Sometimes nothing is the whole point. I pulled out my phone and called my firm's senior investigator, a man named Deacon who I had worked with for 9 years. It was 9:30 on a Friday. He picked up. "I need a full asset trace on someone," I said. "Personal and professional. Everything going back 10 years. Tonight. Monday is fine, but Deacon, I think he's been presenting a financial profile that doesn't exist. Run the LLC filings, the property records, anything registered under his name or any associated entity. Look for gaps. Look for name variations." I gave him Fletcher's full name and his supposed company name, which I had memorized from the business card he had pressed into my hand the second time we met. The handshake that had gone on just a beat too long. When I came back out, Rhonda had arranged things in the way that Rhonda arranges things. Quietly, efficiently, without drama. The venue manager was speaking in low tones with 2 of the guests. Several people had left. My sister was sitting at a table alone. Fletcher was nowhere I could see. "He stepped outside," Rhonda said, walking up to me. "I've already called the contact at the precinct. They're sending someone. I want you to give a statement tonight, while everything is immediate." Rhonda, it was a glass of wine. It was a physical assault in front of approximately 80 witnesses, she said, one of whom is me. You can choose not to pursue it, but you will give the statement because you need it documented, and because I am not going to allow this to be an incident that disappears into a family conversation. She looked at me steadily. Trust me. I trusted her. What followed was 3 hours of a Friday evening I had not anticipated. A patrol officer took my statement at a table in the corner of the venue while the caterers quietly packed up around us. Rhonda gave her own account in the precise, unembellished language of someone who has given 1,000 legal statements and understands that every unnecessary word is a liability. My sister sat 20 feet away, alternately staring at her phone and staring at nothing, while Fletcher stood by the elevator bank speaking to his lawyer on his cell. His voice too low to hear, but his body language speaking a different language entirely. Tight shoulders, a jaw working constantly. Weight shifting foot to foot. I got home at midnight. I sat on my kitchen floor, which I am aware is an unusual place to sit, but it is close to the refrigerator and I needed something cold for my eye, and once I was down there I stayed. The condo was quiet. The light from the city came through the sheer curtains the way it always did. I thought about the look on my sister's face when Rhonda said the word assault. Not anger, not defiance. Something more like the sudden awareness that a situation she thought she had choreographed had developed a logic of its own. My parents called 11 times between midnight and 8 the next morning. I let it go to voicemail. Monday, Deacon sent me his preliminary findings and I read them at my desk with the specific feeling of a person who was not surprised but had hoped to be wrong. Fletcher had no development projects. He had an LLC that had been registered 2.5 years ago and had filed no returns. He had a previous LLC, same name with a slight variation, registered in another state, which had been the subject of a civil complaint by 4 investors who had collectively lost $230,000 in what they alleged was a fraudulent pre-development scheme, units sold for a building that was never permitted, deposits collected and spent before any ground was broken. The complaint had been settled confidentially. He had a bankruptcy in his personal record from 6 years ago. He had a pattern of association with women of relative means in the years since, one of whom Deacon had managed to speak to briefly, a woman who had loaned him $40,000 that was never repaid, who had believed she was co-investing in a property that did not exist. I sat with this for a moment. Then I called my attorney. Then I called my sister. She did not answer. I left a voicemail that was 11 seconds long. I said, "I have information about Fletcher you need to see. I'm not asking you to take my side. I'm asking you to look at something before this goes any further. Call me back." She called back in 4 minutes. We met at a coffee shop that afternoon. She arrived with the specific posture of someone who has decided to be angry and is committed to it. She was wearing sunglasses inside, which for her was emotional armor. She sat down without hugging me, which she always did, and I noticed the absence the way you notice a piece of furniture that has been moved. I did not say anything about the party. I did not say anything about Fletcher throwing wine at me, or about the statement I had given, or about Rhonda. I put Deacon's report on the table between us, a 12-page document printed on plain paper, and I said, "I need you to read this." She looked at it without touching it. "Where did you get this?" "I had someone run a background investigation. This is what I do. This is my actual job." "You investigated my fiancé." "I investigated the financial record of a man who announced at a party that I would be signing over my home to him." "Yes." She picked up the report. She was quiet for a long time. I watched her read. I watched her face go from braced and ready to argue to something else. Something quieter and harder to name. She flipped to page 4, which was the civil complaint, and I watched her read that page twice. "He told me the other LLC was from before," she said finally. "He said it was a misunderstanding with a difficult investor." "There were 4 investors," I said. "They lost a combined $230,000. She set the report down. She took her sunglasses off. Her eyes were red in a way that had nothing to do with crying today. This was the particular red of someone who had been crying recently and often. "He told me," she started and then stopped. "I know," I said. "He said you would do this. He said you'd find a way to make him look bad, because you don't want me to be happy." "I know he said that." I kept my voice steady. "I also know that in the last 8 months, you've transferred money to his LLC twice. I saw the account summary you sent me when you were trying to show me the investment opportunity. I didn't say anything then because I didn't have the full picture." I paused. "How much, total?" She didn't answer immediately. Then, $38,000. She had $38,000. I had watched her build that over 3 years, and I had watched her be proud of it, and I had been proud of her for it. It was hers, and now it was gone. I reached across the table and took her hand, and she did not pull it away. "This isn't me saying I told you so," I said. "This is me saying that what happened at the party was orchestrated. The announcement was designed to put me in a position where saying no in public would make me look cruel, and where saying yes would have transferred my home equity into the orbit of a man who was planning to liquidate it." She stared at the table for a long time. Then she said very quietly, "He's not here." "What?" "He flew to Miami yesterday morning. He said it was a site visit." She looked up. "He turned off his location sharing 2 hours after he landed." I called Deacon from the coffee shop parking lot. I gave him the new information. He called me back 40 minutes later. Fletcher had not gone to any site. He had booked a one-way flight. The next weeks moved with a particular momentum that I have learned to associate with situations that have tipped past a certain point and can no longer be managed by anyone's preference for things to stay quiet. The police report from the party had been formally processed. Because Rhonda's witness statement was part of the record and because she was, in fact, a federal judge, the DA's office had taken an interest that they might not otherwise have taken over a glass of wine at a private party. The civil complaints against Fletcher's previous LLC were pulled into the record by Deacon's report, which I submitted to the detective handling the case. The Attorney General's office in the other state, alerted by the detective, reopened a fraud inquiry that had been sitting dormant. Fletcher was located in Miami. He had not left the country, which was, as Rhonda dryly observed when I told her, a strategic error. My sister cooperated with the investigation. This was not easy for her, and I am not going to pretend it was. She had loved him, or had loved the version of him she had been given. And the distance between that version and the one in Deacon's report was the distance between an image and the thing it was copied from. She gave her financial records to the investigators. She told them about the transfers, about what he had told her the money was for, about the promises he had made. She was one of several women who did this. There were, in the end, 5 of them across 3 states, and together they had collectively given him somewhere over $300,000. He was charged with wire fraud and 2 counts of obtaining property by false pretense. The federal involvement, which Rhonda had quietly flagged to a colleague in the U.S. Attorney's Office, meant the charges carried weight that state-level complaints alone would not have. I went to my parents' house on a Sunday, the first Sunday I had agreed to come since the party. My mother met me at the door with the face of a woman who has spent 3 weeks revising her understanding of a situation and is not finished revising. My father sat in the living room in his chair. My sister was on the couch. She stood when I came in, which she never did, and it was such a small thing and it meant so much. My mother said she was sorry. She said it simply without architecture around it, which was how I knew she meant it. She said she had not understood the full picture, and she said she had spent too much of the 3 weeks since the party asking me why I had pressed charges instead of asking Fletcher why he had thrown a glass at her daughter. My father nodded. He was not a man who said many words, but he reached out and squeezed my hand when I sat down next to him, and that was enough. My sister and I did not have a full conversation that day. We ate lunch together and we talked about small things. Before I left, she walked me to my car and she said, "I keep thinking about how you called Deacon from the parking lot of the coffee shop. Like, you didn't even think twice." "I thought about it for 8 months," I said. "I just finally had the right reason to act." She hugged me in the parking lot for a long time. She was still wearing the sage green jacket she'd had on inside, and she smelled like the same shampoo she'd used since she was 16. And I thought about all the years of small loans and covered rent and rearranged weekends, and I did not feel resentment for any of it, which surprised me. What I felt was something more complicated. The specific weight of loving someone who has cost you something and knowing you would do it again. The assault charge was resolved 4 months after the party. Fletcher's attorney, negotiating in anticipation of the federal fraud charges, agreed to a misdemeanor plea on the assault with a deferred sentence, a $500 fine paid to a victim's fund, and a no-contact order. It was not satisfying in the way that a jury verdict is satisfying, but Rhonda reminded me that the misdemeanor conviction would be on his record, and that the no-contact order protected my sister too, and that the real consequence was not going to come from a glass of wine. It was going to come from a federal courtroom. He pleaded guilty to 1 count of wire fraud 14 months later. The sentence was 27 months. I read the press release on my phone sitting at my desk on a Tuesday afternoon, and then I put my phone in my drawer and went back to the quarterly audit I was working on, which had its own numbers that needed to be followed and its own hidden things that needed to be found. My sister texted me 20 minutes after the verdict, a single line. "Thank you for not letting me disappear into that." I stared at it for a minute. Then I typed back, "You didn't disappear. You testified. That was you." 3 dots appeared and disappeared twice. Then she sent, "I learned from the best forensic accountant I know." I put my phone back in my drawer and finished the audit. The condo is still mine. I refinished the floors in the 2nd bedroom last spring, the home office, and put in a new light fixture that does excellent things to the morning light. I had Rhonda over for dinner last month, and we sat on my small balcony with glasses of wine. A different wine, a better one. And she told me about a case she was hearing that week. And I told her about a set of financials I had been tracing for a client. And the city was laid out below us the way it always was, and I thought, this is what I built. Not the condo, not the career. This. The specific and unremarkable pleasure of an ordinary evening that no one can walk into and rearrange. My sister started a genuine business 8 months ago. She is not going to tell you it was easy, because she is not that kind of person anymore. She is building a small event design company, and she is doing it with a business attorney and an actual accountant and a model I reviewed before she signed anything. She called me 2 weeks ago to tell me she had her first profitable month. She said it like she was still getting used to the word profitable, like it was the new flavor she was not quite sure about yet. I told her it gets easier to say. She laughed. It was the same laugh she has had since she was 12, and I have never not loved it, and I do not plan to start now. People ask me sometimes if I regret calling Deacon from that parking lot. If I think about what would have happened if I had just let it go, the way I had let so many things go before. The honest answer is that I used to let things go because I confused letting go with being kind. I thought absorbing the cost of someone else's choices was the same as loving them, It took a glass of red wine in my face in front of 80 people for me to understand that those are not the same thing at all. What Fletcher did was calculated, every piece of it. The public announcement, the framing of my refusal as selfishness, the way he stepped forward with that glass, was designed to make me look like the problem. And it almost worked. Because for a split second, standing there with wine dripping off my chin, I felt ashamed. That is the thing nobody tells you about being targeted. The first thing you feel is not anger. It is shame. Like you should have seen it coming. Like you brought it somehow. Rhonda standing up changed something in me that night that I am still noticing. Not because she rescued me. I want to be clear about that. I was already going to say no. I had already said no. What she did was refuse to let the room pretend that what just happened was normal. There is a particular kind of courage in that. The courage to name something correctly when everyone else is deciding whether to look away. I have tried to carry that forward with me. To call things what they are, even when it is uncomfortable. Even when it is uncomfortable. Even when it disrupts a room. The thing about Fletcher was not just that he was dishonest. It was that he had identified the exact gap between who my sister wanted to be and who she was afraid she actually was, and he had moved into that gap and made himself comfortable there. That is what people like him do. They do not find strong people and break them. They find people in the middle of becoming and they offer them a shortcut. My sister is not weak. She never was. She was just at a point in her life where she wanted to arrive faster than she was moving, and he handed her a door that he knew was a wall painted to look like a door. I think about the $38,000. I think about it more than I think about the wine, or the party, or even the court case. Because that money was hers, and she had built it herself, and it was supposed to be the beginning of something. The fact that she testified anyway, that she sat across from investigators and walked through every transfer and every promise she had believed. That is the part of this story that I actually find hard to talk about, because it required a kind of courage that has nothing glamorous about it. It was just sitting in a room and telling the truth when the truth was humiliating. That is harder than most things people call brave. What I know now, that I did not fully know before that September Friday, is that integrity is not a feeling. It is a practice. It is the thing you do when the room is quiet and 80 people are watching and the easier path is right there. I said no because saying yes would have been a lie. And I have spent my entire career learning that the lie always costs more than the truth, just on a delayed timeline. Fletcher's entire operation was built on that delay, on the gap between when people hand over the money and when they realize what they handed it over for. The condo is still mine. My sister has her first profitable month behind her, and a business attorney she trusts. Rhonda and I still have dinner on my balcony. The city looks the same from up there, but I look at it differently now. Not with relief exactly, more with the specific awareness of someone who knows exactly what she has and exactly what it cost, and has decided clearly and without ambiguity that it was worth every single year of it.